What was the future like in 1909? Imagine, if you can, the world of the turn of the century in Europe. Imagine, if you can, the Industrial Revolution of the 1880s. Imagine further the inventions that were thought to be world-changing, just as we see our world-changing inventions of today. What was the future like to Filippo Tommaso Marinetti in Paris of 1909, an Italian, together with artists, poets, architects, cooks? What was the world like? The choices were many. You could go backwards, look backwards, and embrace the beautiful 1800s, the 1879 Vienna. You could embrace the romantic poetry of the century prior. You could listen to the music of Brahms, be intoxicated, go back to Beethoven. Or you could accept the noise, sound, friction, dynamism of a new century, of a post-industrial revolution world, where sound, where noise, where the dynamism of wheels rubbing against iron, where smoke puffing from a train was down the street from you, and above all, where you, the individual, were no longer at the center of the physical world, so it seemed. Instead, you were part of a new set of mechanisms. In the 1880s, Friedrich Nietzsche in Germany called for exactly that, a revaluation of all values. And other philosophers, other poets, other artists did precisely the same thing. But in this, as in so many things, the Italians were first. Here came a movement that embraced the Industrial Revolution. It reached out and said, we'll take war, we'll take bombs, we'll take the impersonality of this world and turn it into a structure in art, in architecture, in music, in food, in every area of life. Futurism intended to be a modus vivendi, a way of living, not simply the passive art that we see on the walls of the museums to that date. Many of the futurists found old work to be self-indulgent, decadent, not responsive. The same, I suppose, as a young person today might, who played on the internet with, or twittered or did one of those things, they would see newspapers as kind of an antique self-indulgence. Think of this in 1909, where a new world was being pushed upon artists. The choices were many. They made good ones. Italian futurists wanted very badly to have everything that they did permeate the thinking of those who looked at art. And by the way, they were not in love with art critics. Many of them called them embalmers. They wanted them to be infected with a new sense of vitality that came from machines and came from the new industrial world. And so what did they glorify? You can see in some of the paintings in this show, words that express noise, tum, bang, boom. They wanted the paintings themselves to come out with noise. The futurists, unlike other artists, in my opinion, would like very much if right in the middle of this interview, my phone went off. They would think that was wonderful. They would think, this is not an interruption. It's a compliment to what's happening. My phone, by the way, is turned off. But they would like it very much if I went to the tourist shop over here and bought a futurist tie. And instead of this tie, put this wild futurist concoction on and said that I've adopted the movement. They love the idea that you were infected by their movement in every possible way. How long did the movement actually last? Well, it hasn't quite ended. In fact, we're standing in a building that is arguably an inspiration to movement, to procession. You know, the elements of a beautiful space. One of them, of course, is procession. This is an elegant example of that, i.e. movement. Static art, or the art that was the Romantic period art, even the great masters, were always fighting the medium, always fighting to get past the canvas. There was always a pushing beyond, a reaching out. In the Futurists, I admit that it was exaggerated, but their movement has lasted in architecture. Today, even graffiti. Now, a futurist would see good graffiti as a very good idea. After all, it's a public expression, it's revolutionary, it's highly self-expressive, it's boldly full of color. They would find that to be a wonderful expression. And in modern architecture, some of the buildings we see that are called postmodern or whatever the wording goes on the buildings, actually the idea is not to follow a given structure, not to follow even some of the principles in architecture that made it easy to build our modern world. We find futurism in strange places. Futurists loved demonstrations. For example, they would think that this interview was tedious and boring because there was no noise in the ambience. I mean, I hear some cars going on outside. Maybe we should bring them up. Maybe we should have a call for the destruction of museums, which they did. They glorified bringing down old museums where the art was stuffy. To the futurists, the present was not worthless. The present was not simply a rejection of the past. It was an embrace that was inevitable, an embrace of all of the technology that they believed would transform the world.